A nurse adopted a newborn baby. 10 years later, when she discovered the truth about the boy's identity, she deeply regretted it. Selina slipped through the quiet corridors of the neonatal unit, a place where time seemed to stand still and yet move swiftly all at once. She'd been a nurse here for over a decade, seen more newborns than she could count. But that day was different. She remembered it vividly. The air felt thick. The steady, mechanical beeping seemed louder, sharper somehow. Among the bustling nurses and tiny cries, 3 infants caught her attention, each with a different story and a distinct charm. 2 were beautiful boys, Ethan and Mason, and 1 was a sweet girl named Ava. They seemed unusually calm, gazing with wide eyes as if soaking up the world's unfamiliar sight. Selina had rarely cared for such contented babies. They were, as she would later tell her colleagues, a rare delight in the often hectic ward. Mason's family had come soon after his condition stabilized, their relief palpable as they cradled their child. Ava, too, left with her parents, her little hand grasping her mother's finger with a quiet grip that melted Selina's heart. She'd expected Ethan to leave next, to be welcomed by his own family, who she assumed would be just as eager to hold him close. But as the hours turned to days, no one arrived for Ethan. The staff called, searched, sent messages, but every effort faded into silence. Selina found herself lingering by Ethan's crib, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Her thoughts tangled with questions that had no answers. Every so often he would grab her finger, clutching with surprising strength, and Selina felt a pang that went beyond her usual professional attachment. "They'll come," she whispered to him one evening, gently brushing his cheek. But in the back of her mind, a gnawing doubt was growing. The silent phone, the unfilled discharge papers, all signs pointed to a different reality. Days turned into a week, and Ethan's bassinet remained as empty as her heart felt full each time she held him. Selina had watched many babies leave her care, often with a bittersweet sense of accomplishment. But something about Ethan, his abandonment, his gentle, trusting eyes, lingered with her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The idea of him entering the foster care system left her heart heavy, and she found herself considering possibilities that only weeks ago would have seemed unthinkable. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Selina sat alone with Ethan in the dim nursery light. She studied his tiny face, the soft, fair curls that framed his head, and the way his fingers curled and uncurled with unconscious trust. In a sudden surge of emotion, she whispered, "What if it was just us?" Her voice barely broke the silence, but the words, once spoken, took root and refused to leave her mind. Selina weighed her decision carefully. Adoption wasn't something she'd taken lightly. It was a commitment that stretched beyond paperwork, beyond protocol. She thought of her modest, mortgage-free home, the quiet neighborhood perfect for children, and her steady income that allowed her a certain degree of security. She even went over the idea with herself in practical terms. Her life was stable, and she could provide Ethan with a safe, loving home. But it wasn't just logic that led her. It was an unexplainable sense of belonging that had settled deep in her heart. When she informed the hospital of her intention to adopt, the response was met with cautious optimism. "You know what this means, don't you?" one of the hospital administrators had asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. But Selina didn't flinch. She knew the challenges, the inspections, the questions she'd face, and she was ready for all of it, even if it meant waiting through the administrative maze with no guarantees. Days later, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was businesslike, clipped, but the words were enough to set Selina's heart alight. "Congratulations, Ms. Taylor. Your adoption application has been approved." She felt a surge of joy so intense it left her breathless. The hospital staff gathered around her, offering hugs and cheers, genuinely happy for her and the baby she had already come to love as her own. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations. Selina selected a jungle theme for Ethan's room, painting the walls in a soft green and choosing little animal decals to brighten the space. She spent hours arranging his crib, checking the toys, and setting up a cozy chair where she imagined they'd spent countless nights together. She picked out little onesies and blankets, each purchase a step closer to bringing him home. Finally, the day arrived. Selina pulled into the parking lot of the Child Protective Services building, her heart pounding with anticipation. The moment she laid eyes on Ethan, her resolve crystallized. He was hers, not by blood, but by a bond forged in quiet nights and whispered promises. She held him close, feeling his small fingers wrap around her own, and a warmth spread through her that dispelled every last shred of doubt. As they left, Ethan's tiny head rested against her shoulder, his breathing soft and steady. "We'll be all right," she murmured, her voice filled with the kind of certainty only love could give. Each step towards the car, toward home, marked the beginning of their journey. One she knew wouldn't be without challenges, but also one she knew they would face together. Each mile they drove brought Selina and Ethan closer to the place they would soon call home and to the beginning of a life they would shape together. Once they arrived, Selina carefully lifted Ethan from his car seat, his eyes darting around the unfamiliar space, curious and wide. She guided him through the house, finally stopping at the nursery she'd lovingly prepared, filled with a rainbow of toys and picture books. "This is your new home," she whispered, easing him into the crib. Ethan let out a contented gurgle, reaching for a plush giraffe, and Selina laughed, a joy sparking in her that she hadn't known she was missing. The rest of the day melted away in a series of simple moments, stories read aloud, playful laughter, and quiet reassurance, all to make Ethan feel secure and cherished. That night, as she settled into the rocking chair, Ethan cuddled in her arms. The room held a peaceful silence. She could hear his gentle breathing, and it filled her with a sense of purpose. "You'll always be loved and safe," she whispered, words her own adoptive parents had once promised her. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, feeling a connection that seemed to transcend time. As she laid him down in his crib, Selina felt prepared for whatever the future would bring, knowing they would face it side by side. 10 years later, Ethan burst through the front door, his backpack dragging on the floor, the weight of his day etched on his face. Selina glanced up from the kitchen, catching the frustration in his eyes. "Hey, Ethan, what happened?" she asked, moving closer as he shrugged, tossing his backpack down with a heavy sigh. "Just a rough day," he muttered. Selina's heart tightened. She settled at the table, waiting quietly, giving him space to open up. Finally he spoke, barely meeting her eyes. "Kids at school. They called me the adopted kid." The hurt in his voice sliced through her, and she instinctively reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Kids can be so thoughtless," she said softly, as he wiped away a lone tear. "Why do they care so much?" he asked, and she pulled him into a hug, feeling his small body tense with lingering sadness. "When I was your age, I went through the same thing," she admitted quietly, surprising him. Ethan's eyes widened, and Selina shared the stories of her own childhood, the teasing she had faced, and the lessons it had taught her. "But you know what? Being adopted means we were chosen, Ethan. That's something special," she added gently, hoping her words would soothe him. After a long pause, Ethan looked up, curiosity glinting in his eyes. "Mum, do you know my real parents' names?" Selina's heart clenched. She had known this day would come, but hadn't anticipated how unprepared she'd feel. She took a steadying breath. "Why do you ask, honey?" she replied, buying herself a moment to gather her thoughts. "I just want to know," he said quietly. Selina hesitated, weighing her words before answering. "I don't know their names, sweetheart," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. Ethan's shoulders sagged in disappointment. "Oh, okay," he murmured. She embraced him again, feeling the weight of her choice settle in. "But I do know they missed out on having an amazing son like you," she added, hoping to lighten his mood. "Mom, why did they leave me at the hospital?" Ethan's voice broke the silence, raw and questioning. A lump formed in Selina's throat. "I don't know, Ethan," she replied, her words careful. She wished she had answers for him, but all she could offer was reassurance. Maybe they had their reasons, but it wasn't because of you. His gaze searched hers, and she squeezed his hand, hoping it was enough for now. To lift his spirits, she suggested a movie night, and he nodded eagerly. That evening they curled up on the couch, cocooned in blankets, laughter filling the room as they shared popcorn and watched his favorite films. By the end, Ethan's earlier worries had faded, replaced by a relaxed smile. As she tucked him in, Selina sat by his side. "No matter what, you're loved," she whispered. "It's not about where you come from, it's about who you are." Ethan's eyes sparkled with surprise. "Really?" he asked, awe. "Really?" she confirmed, brushing back his hair. "Our family loves you just as you are," Ethan grinned, hugging his pillow tightly. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. When he finally drifted off, Selina made her way to the living room, the soft glow of her laptop lighting her face as she typed. She had to try. Driven by her love for Ethan, she began sifting through records, hoping for some clue to his past. Hours passed as she read every snippet, each click of the mouse echoing in the quiet room. When she stumbled across a familiar name, her heart skipped a beat. Marilyn Collins, listed as an emergency contact, perhaps his grandmother. Scribbling down the details, Selina whispered to herself, "This could be it." The path forward wasn't clear, but for Ethan's sake, she would find it. What if Marilyn had the answers Ethan was seeking? Or what if she didn't want to talk at all? Selina tried to brace herself for any possible outcome. "Come, I just need to do this for Ethan," she thought, taking deep breaths and trying to stay calm. The next morning, Selina waved Ethan off to school, trying to keep her nerves in check. "Have a great day, sweetheart," she called out, giving him a reassuring smile. As soon as he was out of sight, she grabbed her car keys, her hand trembling slightly. "This is it," she told herself, taking a deep breath. She knew the day ahead could change everything, but she was ready to face it for Ethan. Selina's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she navigated through the quiet neighborhood. The houses blurred past as her mind raced with possibilities. She double-checked the address she had written down and slowed as she approached the right house. "Here we go," she whispered, taking a deep breath. Parking the car, she stepped out and walked up the path to the front door, her heart pounding. Selina hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. After a few seconds, it creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with a puzzled expression. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle but wary. "Hi, my name is Selina," she began, her nerves evident. "Are you Marilyn?" The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I am. Do I know you?" Selina shook her head, taking a deep breath. "I'm looking for Richard and Anna," Selina said, watching Marilyn's reaction closely. The elderly woman frowned, shaking her head. "I haven't seen them in years," she admitted. "Do you know where they might be?" Selina asked hopefully. Marilyn sighed, a look of sadness crossing her face. No, I'm afraid I don't. They just disappeared one day. Selina's heart sank at the news, but she pressed on gently. Marilyn invited Selina inside, and they sat at the kitchen table. I did receive letters from them for a while, Marilyn shared, her eyes distant with memories. But eventually the letters stopped. I miss them dearly and have no idea where they are now. Selina listened intently, feeling a pang of sympathy for the woman. Would you like some tea? Marilyn offered, and Selina nodded, grateful for the warmth. As they sipped their tea, Selina explained her reason for visiting. Boy named Ethan? She began, watching Marilyn's reaction. He was abandoned at the hospital 10 years ago. Marilyn's eyes widened, her hand trembling slightly. Ethan? My grandson, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Selina nodded. Yes, I believe so. Marilyn's eyes filled with tears, her curiosity about her grandson evident. Selina took a deep breath and began explaining Ethan's background. He was left at the hospital as a newborn, she said softly. I was his neonatal nurse and couldn't bear the thought of him going into the system. So I adopted him. Marilyn listened, tears welling up in her eyes. I love him as my own, Selina continued. He's a wonderful boy, and he deserves to know where he came from. Marilyn's eyes filled with tears as she realized the impact of her son and daughter-in-law's disappearance. I never knew what happened to them, she said, her voice shaking. It broke my heart when they stopped writing. And now to hear about Ethan. It's overwhelming. Selina reached out, placing a comforting hand on Marilyn's arm. I understand, she said gently. It's a lot to take in. Marilyn's emotions shifted, and she became defensive. Why did you come here? She asked, her tone sharp. Selina sighed, understanding the confusion and pain behind the question. I came because Ethan is starting to ask questions, she explained. I want to give him answers, but I also want to protect him. I needed to know more about his family to understand his past, so I can help him with his future. Marilyn's defensive posture softened as she listened to Selina's story. Tears streamed down her face. You've given him so much love and care, she said, her voice trembling. I can't thank you enough for that. She paused, wiping her eyes. I want to meet him, Selina. I want to see my grandson. Selina nodded, her heart aching for Marilyn. Of course, she said softly. We'll make it happen. Selina and Marilyn discussed how best to introduce her to Ethan. I think it would be best if we said you were an old family friend, Selina suggested. Marilyn agreed, understanding the need for caution. That sounds good, she said, nodding. They planned the meeting carefully, choosing a neutral location and deciding on the best way to ease Ethan into this new relationship. Both felt a mix of nerves and hope. Marilyn and Selina decided on the plan. Marilyn would meet Ethan under the guise of being an old family friend. It's the best way to ease him into it, Selina said, and Marilyn nodded in agreement. That afternoon they made their way back to Selina's house, both women feeling a mix of nervousness and anticipation. This is it, Marilyn whispered, trying to calm her racing heart. Inside Selina's home, the sound of the kettle clicking to a stop cut through the quiet hum of the small living room. Selina brought the tray over to the low coffee table where Marilyn sat, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes flitting nervously between the family photos on the walls and Ethan, who sat across from her, watching her with quiet curiosity. Marilyn's gaze softened as she looked at him, taking in the dark hair and serious brown eyes that studied her with an intensity uncommon for his age. So, Ethan, she began, clearing her throat softly, what are you interested in these days? Ethan thought for a moment, glancing at Selina before answering. Well, I like drawing a lot. Animals, mostly. And I've been reading some adventure books. Mom bought me a new one last month, he added, pride slipping into his voice. Marilyn's smile grew. Drawing animals, huh? You know, your grandfather used to do the same thing when he was young. We'd find sketches of birds and dogs all over his notebooks. Could never sit through a single history class without doodling on the margins. Her laugh was soft, fond, but her gaze stayed fixed on Ethan's face, searching for something beyond his polite smile. Ethan listened, nodding as he warmed to Marilyn's presence. The tentative beginnings of comfort crept into the conversation as he shared bits and pieces of his life, his favorite classes, how he'd recently scored his first goal in soccer, and the excitement he felt when the team celebrated with him. Marilyn leaned in, asking questions in a way that let him feel truly heard. Slowly, Selina saw her son's shoulders relax, the initial stiffness giving way to something softer, a shy trust, maybe. After a while, Selina noticed Marilyn's eyes narrow slightly as she observed Ethan, her fingers tightening around the cup of tea she had barely sipped. "Selina," she murmured, as if suddenly remembering her, "could I talk to you for a moment?" Selina caught Ethan's eye, gave him a reassuring smile, then led Marilyn into the small kitchen, leaving the murmur of a cartoon playing quietly on the living room TV behind them. She shut the door, watching Marilyn's brows knit into a frown. Marilyn hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if to ensure Ethan was out of earshot. "Selina," she began, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I know I don't have the right to question you on this, but doesn't he look different?" Her words faltered, but the question remained, pointed and clear. Selina stiffened. "Different how?" she asked, masking the unease that flickered inside her. Marilyn's eyes softened with apology, but she pushed forward. "It's just that he doesn't have any of the family's features. The chin, the nose. Even his eyes. There's not a trace of—" She trailed off, realizing her words were grazing a painful line. Selina swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the silence stretching between them. "Marilyn, he's my son. And as far as I'm concerned, that's all that matters." Marilyn nodded, perhaps sensing the firmness in Selina's tone. "I understand," she whispered. I just wanted to be sure." But before either of them could say more, the sharp ring of the doorbell broke the tension. Selina's eyes flashed with surprise as she moved to answer, leaving Marilyn staring pensively into her teacup. Opening the door, Selina found herself face to face with a couple, both looking tense and slightly worn, accompanied by a boy who looked to be about Ethan's age. The man extended a hand, offering a hesitant smile. "Hi, I'm Ryan," he said, glancing Selina, who had just entered the hallway. "And this is my wife, Jennifer. We've come to talk about something that's difficult to explain." Is this Ethan's home?" Selina's pulse quickened, but she managed a calm nod. "Yes. Come in," she said, leading them to the living room where Ethan was now sitting, curiosity plain on his face. They sat down, Ryan clearing his throat as he spoke. "We don't mean to intrude, but there's something you need to know about Ethan." He looked over at his son, Mason, and then at Jennifer, who seemed to be steadying herself. "It's hard to explain, but our families, they're connected in a way none of us could have anticipated." Selina's breath hitched, the weight of his words pressing heavily on her as she waited. Ryan continued, his gaze fixed on Ethan. "Mason was born the same day as Ethan. There was an incident at the hospital, and it turns out the two boys were switched at birth." He glanced at Jennifer, his voice tightening. "We only found out recently when Mason had some health tests done." The room grew still, the revelation settling into the air like dust. Selina's mind raced, every instinct as Ethan's mother pulling her thoughts back to him, to his well-being. She steadied herself, holding back the flood of emotions as she took in Ryan's words. Jennifer finally spoke, her voice soft and raw. "We're not here to disrupt anything," she said, glancing between Selina. "But Mason, he has a medical condition, and we were hoping to find a donor, someone who might be a match." Her gaze shifted to Ethan, filled with a quiet, pleading hope. Selina nodded slowly, feeling the ground shift beneath her, the weight of her love for Ethan pressing into the new reality before them. "We hoped that tracking down Ethan's adoption records might lead us to the right match for Mason," Ryan explained, his tone full of quiet urgency. Ethan sat listening intently, his mind racing to comprehend all that was being said. Selina was stunned by the unexpected revelation, taking a deep breath as she worked to steady her emotions. "I didn't know," she murmured, her voice gentle. "I've been searching for Ethan's birth parents, Richard and Anna, but so far I've found nothing." Ryan and Jennifer exchanged a glance of cautious hope. "Anything you uncover could help us," Ryan replied, resolute. "We're ready to do whatever it takes for Mason's sake." Selina gave a solemn nod, feeling the weight of what this meant for both families. Just then, Marilyn entered the living room, her eyes widening the moment they fell on Mason. She froze, one hand instinctively covering her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her voice breaking as her eyes filled with tears. "He looks exactly like Richard." The room fell into silence, each person processing Marilyn's words. "Are you related to him?" Ryan asked softly. Marilyn nodded, her gaze still fixed on Mason. "Yes," she replied, voice trembling. "I'm Ethan's grandmother." Marilyn could hardly take her eyes off Mason. "He's so much like Richard," she murmured, almost to herself. Turning to Ryan and Jennifer, she added, "If Mason needs a donor, I'll be tested. I'll do whatever's necessary." Ryan and Jennifer exchanged another glance, filled with a spark of hope. "Thank you," Jennifer said, her own voice catching as she blinked back tears. "This means so much to us." Marilyn nodded with resolve. "We're family, and family does whatever it can to help." Clearing his throat, Ryan spoke with quiet sincerity. "We'd like to properly introduce ourselves to Ethan, if you're open to that. We'd like to explain everything directly." Selina glanced at Ethan, who was listening closely but with a steady composure. She nodded. "I think it's time he knows the truth," she agreed, giving Ethan a gentle smile. "Are you ready to hear more, Ethan?" she asked softly. Selina felt a mix of relief and anxiety, knowing this was a pivotal moment. Ethan looked at her and nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. Selina squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We're all here for you," she assured him. Looking back at Ryan and Jennifer, she said, "Let's face this together." The group moved into the living room, bracing for a conversation that was sure to bring deep emotions. In the living room, a hopeful tension hung in the air. Ryan and Jennifer took turns recounting the hospital mix-up, their long search for Ethan, and Mason's medical condition. Selina and Marilyn listened closely, both occasionally wiping away a tear. "We never wanted this to happen," Ryan said, his voice faltering. "But we're beyond grateful to have found you." Selina nodded, feeling the enormity of their words. "We'll work through this together," she replied, her tone full of quiet resolve. Soon after, Ethan came face to face with Mason, his brother by a twist of fate. They looked at each other, hesitant but curious. "Hi," Ethan said softly. "Hi," Mason responded, a small smile on his face. The adults watched, hearts swelling with emotion. "This is your brother," Selina said gently, resting a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan looked at Mason, the realization beginning to sink in, the complex threads of their lives woven together in ways he was only starting to grasp. "We'll work it out," he said, his voice carrying both uncertainty and hope. He sat quietly, absorbing all he had just learned about his roots. The shock was profound, yet with it came a sense of peace. Finally, there were answers. Selina sat beside him, a comforting presence. "It's a lot to take in, isn't it?" she said softly. Ethan nodded, his thoughts swirling. "Yeah, but I'm glad to finally know," he replied, his face softening with a small, hopeful smile. Despite everything, Ethan's heart remained firmly anchored to Selina, the mother he'd known his whole life. Their bond endured, even as they ventured into this new chapter. "You'll always be my mum," Ethan said one evening. Selina pulled him close. "And you'll always be my son," she whispered, her voice overflowing with love. They returned to their routines, finding comfort in the familiar, even as they adapted to the evolving realities around them. Ethan and Mason's connection grew over time as they discovered shared interests. Ethan sat stiffly on the living room sofa, his eyes cautiously meeting Mason's from across the room. Mason's gaze darted around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings of Selina's home, as if gauging each corner for clues about Ethan's life. It was their first encounter, and the air between them was thick with silent curiosity and a shared nervousness they couldn't shake. Selina broke the tension first, setting a tray of cookies and juice on the table with a quiet smile. "Why don't you two help yourselves?" she said, her tone warm but just a little too cheerful, as if trying to close the widening gap between them with a bit of sugar and politeness. Mason reached forward, snatching a cookie quickly, as though trying to hide the fact he hadn't eaten much that day. He took a bite, then looked up at Ethan, waiting for him to say something, but the words wouldn't come. "Didn't think I'd meet anyone like me," Mason finally muttered, as if talking to the cookie more than Ethan. "Same," Ethan replied after a pause, his voice softer, careful. He was used to knowing things clearly, his friends, his routine, the way Selina made pancakes on Sunday mornings. But here, with Mason, everything felt upturned and fragile, like a puzzle he wasn't sure how to piece together. Mason tilted his head, studying him. "So, what do you do for fun?" he asked, his question simple but oddly loaded, as though he were feeling out the shape of Ethan's world. Ethan shrugged, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I like to read, sometimes write," he offered, his voice slightly guarded. Mason's eyebrows shot up. "Writing? Like stories?" he asked, his face lighting up for the first time since arriving. There was a glimmer of recognition there, something genuine that made Ethan feel a little less on edge. "Yeah, I mean, just small stuff." Ethan paused, then added, "Mom says I have a knack for it." Mason's expression softened at the mention of Mom. For a moment, he seemed lost, looking down at his hands, his fingers picking absently at the hem of his sweater. "Jennifer says the same thing about my drawings. She's got this whole folder of them from when I was little. Mostly scribbles, but she calls them masterpieces." A faint, embarrassed smile appeared on his face. Ethan let out a soft laugh, a small, almost hesitant sound. It was a strange comfort, hearing Mason's story and feeling the same steady warmth that Selina gave him in the way Mason talked about his own mom. In that small exchange, Ethan felt the first thin thread of connection forming, something real yet still fragile, as if they were both testing the ground beneath them. Over the next few weeks, the families arranged outings together, tentative and polite at first, but slowly morphing into shared moments that became something more substantial. They spent an afternoon at the park, where the boys finally ran off alone, racing through the green fields in an unspoken challenge. Selina and Jennifer watched from a distance, sharing knowing glances and silent hopes for their sons. Bit by bit, the boys discovered commonalities that seemed to crop up in unexpected places. They laughed at the same kinds of jokes, could spend hours arguing over the same comic book heroes, and shared a quiet understanding about the strange circumstances that had brought them together. They hadn't asked for this twist in their lives, but neither had rejected it. One evening, after dinner at Selina's, Mason spoke up as they cleared the plates. "I don't remember much from when I was younger. It's like everything's just bits and pieces, you know." Ethan nodded, his brow furrowing slightly as he placed a glass in the sink. "Yeah, but maybe it's better that way," he replied, feeling the weight of it sink in. "Sometimes things are just easier not knowing. At least not everything." The boys exchanged a look that was difficult to explain, an acknowledgement of the confusing terrain they both now navigated. They didn't need to say it aloud to know that they shared something unspoken, something that tied them together beyond blood or circumstance. They were brothers now, not just because they had to be, but because they chose to be. As they headed back into the living room, Selina and Ryan were deep in discussion, trying to map out their roles in this new family structure. There was a careful understanding between them, a commitment to protect and nurture the boys in whatever way was best. The adults spoke of routines, holiday plans, and shared responsibilities, forming an invisible framework of support around Ethan and Mason. From his seat on the couch, Ethan watched Selina closely, noting how her eyes softened when she looked at Mason and the warmth she radiated toward him. He felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, confusion, a budding sense of peace. He didn't know what the future held or how their lives might shift again, but sitting beside Mason, he felt certain they'd face it together. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel like maybe, just maybe, they could make this new reality work. The autumn sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a soft amber glow across the living room where Ethan and Mason sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered pieces of an intricate jigsaw puzzle. Ethan's eyes squinted in concentration, carefully fitting pieces together, while Mason leaned in, his brow furrowed as he searched for a specific corner piece. "This one," Mason mumbled, holding up a piece triumphantly. "I swear it has to go here." Ethan glanced at it skeptically, but he nudged Mason's hand to fit it into place. The piece snapped in, and Mason grinned, looking up at Ethan. "You're getting better at this," Ethan said with a smirk, his tone filled with the easy camaraderie that had blossomed between them over months of slow, cautious progress. Mason chuckled, nudging Ethan's shoulder as he shifted his attention to the puzzle's final section. On the couch nearby, Selina sat next to Marilyn, her gaze following the boys with a warmth she could barely contain. The past year had not been easy, filled with countless hospital visits, sleepless nights, and the weight of a truth that none of them could have anticipated. Yet here they were, a family, no matter how unexpectedly it had all come together. Marilyn leaned over, lowering her voice as she said, "You know, sometimes I wonder how things would have turned out had I never met him, never seen Ethan. Strange, isn't it?" Selina nodded, her eyes softening. "It is, but I can't imagine it any other way now. He's family." She paused, glancing at Mason, who was enthusiastically explaining something about the puzzle to Ethan, the way he always did when he was trying to impress his older brother. "And I think he feels it too." A soft chuckle escaped Marilyn. "Maybe so, But I want you to know I'll always be here for him, for both of them." Her eyes lingered on Mason and then drifted back to Selina with a quiet determination that needed no further words. She had already promised, in as many ways as she could, to be there for Mason's medical needs, to stand by them all. Selina felt the weight of Marilyn's promise settle within her, a steady comfort that had grown to be as constant as the ticking of the old clock on the wall. She simply nodded in reply, letting the silence speak for itself. "Mom!" Ethan's voice pulled her back. He was holding up the last piece of the puzzle. "It's all you. Finish it." Selina laughed, a soft, genuine sound that felt like a rare treasure. She crossed the room and knelt beside the boys, carefully fitting the final piece into place. As the picture clicked together, a landscape of a peaceful meadow with a winding river, she felt an unexpected swell of pride, both in the puzzle and in the family that had somehow fit together, against all odds. "There," she said, sitting back and admiring the completed picture. "A team effort." Mason beamed, eyes shining. "Yeah, but we couldn't have done it without you." Selina's hand rested on his shoulder, giving a gentle squeeze. "Couldn't have done it without any of us," she said, her voice calm but resolute. She turned to Ethan, whose expression softened as he nodded in agreement. In the silence that followed, an unspoken promise seemed to settle between them, an understanding of the years that had brought them here, the memories and the countless challenges they'd all endured. Ryan entered the room, glancing at the puzzle with raised brows. "Looks like we've got some puzzle masters in the house. Anyone up for a snack break?" The boys erupted in eager agreement, scrambling to their feet. Marilyn chuckled, getting up to follow them into the kitchen, but Selina remained behind for a moment, watching as her family moved into the next room, voices mixing in a gentle hum. The world outside their door would never be simple or free from hardship, but in this space, within these walls, there was an undeniable sense of harmony. A family bound together by promises both spoken and silent. As she made her way to join them, a thought lingered, hopeful and steady. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And that's the incredible, heart-wrenching journey of a nurse who took a leap of faith to save a child and uncovered secrets that changed her life forever. What would you do if faced with a truth that could shatter everything you thought you knew about family and love? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as captivating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more stories that keep you thinking long after they end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.